Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see you again. You've come to Menopause University, and you've come at just the right time for somewhat of a review. This is video number 452, and it's going to be an overall review of videos 309 to 451. That's 142 videos. And they were all on cancers of one kind or another. Actually, together they constituted 5 separate units on cancer. The first unit, from video 309 to video 318, was on cancer in general. The second unit, from video 320 to 339, was on endometrial uterine cancer. The third unit, from video 340 to 354, was on cervical cancer. The fourth unit, from video 356 to 410, was on breast cancer. And the fifth unit, from video 413 to 451, was on epithelial ovarian cancer. I gave you some little breaks with lighter topics between these big units, and that's why some of the video numbers I cited weren't consecutive. Well, now that you've learned so much about all these different cancers individually, it's time for us to compare these cancers collectively. This will put some things into perspective in a way that isn't possible when you consider each cancer individually. Now, you will not find this comparative perspective in my book, in either edition, first or second. What you will find is each cancer addressed individually. This is one of the many things I just love about these videos. I can come at things from so many different angles. So watch this video in order to get this comparative perspective. Have you ever heard of a television game show by the name of Truth or Consequences? It was the first game show to air on television. And the fact that I remember it so well means that I'm old. The show consisted of asking the contestants a zany trivia question for which there was rarely an actual answer. So hardly anyone provided the truth. And the consequence for failing to give the true answer was participation in an embarrassing situation. So the show was really a series of people having to do ridiculous, comical things as a consequence of answering incorrectly. Obviously, the goal of the show was entertainment rather than answering the question truthfully. And apparently the contestants knew that this was the goal because they rarely or never seemed upset in the least when they couldn't answer the question. Of course, being the nerd that I am and loving all things academic, I was actually disappointed that there weren't any real, true answers to the questions. I would have preferred something akin to school. So I rarely watched the show. Well, today we're going to play our own version of Truth or Consequences. But instead of asking you zany questions, I'm going to pose cancer questions. And instead of posing questions for which there are no real answers, I will pose questions for which there are actual factual answers. And the answers will be things I've already taught you in the previous videos on cancer. Our game will constitute a review by comparing all the different cancers we've covered this far. Cancer in general, endometrial uterine cancer, cervical cancer, breast cancer, and epithelial ovarian cancer. Now, you already know that I'm an organization freak, so I'm not going to just launch questions at you all willy-nilly. I'm going to organize them by category. And the categories will constitute our factors of comparison. And I'll provide the answers immediately, Then I'll elaborate just a tiny bit on the answers. So here are our factors of comparison: incidence and prevalence, cause, risk factors, genetics, hormonal cycles, screening, symptoms, diagnosis, pathology, grading and staging, treatment, prognosis, prevention, fear, and so-called common knowledge. We'll be focusing on comparison of the reproductive cancers, including endometrial uterine cancer, cervical cancer, breast cancer, and epithelial ovarian cancer. So I will pose one cancer quiz question for each of the factors of comparison, 15 quiz questions in all. But unlike Truth or Consequences on television, I will not subject you to an embarrassing situation for failure to provide the true answer. Nobody will know whether or not you answered correctly. I guess the actual consequence of not knowing the stuff is an increased risk for these very cancers. And that's a lot worse than participating in an embarrassing situation. But to take the place of enduring the embarrassing situation, you'll have to endure hearing me play little diddlies on the piano while you're contemplating the answer to each question. The list of answer options will be the same for all 15 questions. Here are the answer options that you'll see over and over again, question after question. A, endometrial uterine cancer. B, cervical cancer. C, breast cancer. D, epithelial ovarian cancer. E, endometrial uterine cancer and cervical cancer. F, breast cancer and epithelial ovarian cancer. G, endometrial uterine cancer and epithelial ovarian cancer. H, cervical cancer and breast cancer. I, endometrial uterine cancer and breast cancer. J, cervical cancer and epithelial ovarian cancer. K, endometrial uterine, cervical, and epithelial ovarian cancers. L, endometrial uterine, breast, and epithelial ovarian cancers. And M, all 4 cancers. So go ahead and get used to this list of answer options, since it will be the very same for every quiz question I pose today. And I won't repeat the whole list again. You'll just see it after each question. And to fill the silence for 15 seconds or so while you consider the answers, you'll have to bear hearing me play the piano. And I'll play simple little snippets of pieces, so hopefully it won't be too much of a distraction. Okay, we'll start with incidence and prevalence. Here's your first cancer quiz question. From a purely statistical standpoint, which of the following cancers has the highest incidence? And here's the answer to this first question in bold font. It's breast cancer. I've taught you about your lifetime risk for each of these cancers. Here's a chart that compares them with regard to how many women get each kind of cancer. So you are least likely to get epithelial ovarian cancer in the red row, which has an incidence of 1 in 78. Next is the incidence of cervical cancer in the yellow row, with an incidence of 1 in 45. After that comes endometrial uterine cancer in the green row, with an incidence of 1 in 29. But the incidence of breast cancer in the blue row surpasses all of them, with an incidence of 1 in 7. But you learned that much of the high incidence of breast cancer is due to factors other than truthful statistics. Unlike any other cancer, the incidence statistics for breast cancer is due to multiple widespread national screening programs for breast cancer, inclusion of breast pre-cancers in the statistics for true breast cancers, easy diagnosis of breast cancer, and over-diagnosis of breast cancer. So it is true that breast cancer has the highest incidence, but it is also true that the high incidence of breast cancer is inflated. All right, let's go on to the next factor of comparison, which is cause. Here's your cancer quiz question. The gynecologic cancer or cancers for which we know the true cause include, and you see the same answer options you saw for the previous quiz question. Here's the correct answer highlighted in bold font. It's endometrial uterine cancer and cervical cancer. We know that the true cause of cervical cancer is the human papillomavirus, commonly called HPV. And we know that endometrial uterine cancer is caused by estrogen. However, we do not know the true cause of breast cancer or epithelial ovarian cancer. So how are you doing with our truth or consequences game so far? Now we come to risk factors. For each cancer unit, I went to extremes in order to ensure that you really understand all the risk factors. I even gave you separate video tutorials for individual risk factors. So this is one comparative category with which you should have complete confidence. And here's your cancer quiz question. Age is a risk factor that affects every single kind of gynecologic cancer in some significant manner, but it is not the same in terms of specifics for, and there's your familiar list of answer options. Which one is it? You know, on the Real Truth or Consequences television show, there was a loud buzzer that sounded in response to incorrect answers. Aren't you glad I don't have a noisy, obnoxious buzzer? That annoying buzzer was one of the reasons I hardly ever watched the show. So here's the truthful answer. It's all 4 cancers. You learned that young age is a risk factor for cervical cancer, while older age is a risk factor for endometrial uterine, breast, and epithelial ovarian cancers. So, age is a critical risk factor for all 4 of them, but the precise age that constitutes a risk differs from cancer to cancer. Do you see how comparing these cancers is useful? It brings out details that you might miss otherwise. Now we have genetics. Of course, a genetic predisposition can be at the root of just about any disease, but when it comes to these 4 gynecologic cancers, genetics plays a big role for some and not for others. So see if you can answer this cancer quiz question about genetics. The gynecologic cancer or cancers for which genetics rarely play or plays a role, are and here's the answer in bold. It's cervical cancer. That's right. Both breast cancer and epithelial ovarian cancer have well-known genetic mutations, although these genetic mutations cause only a small minority of actual cancer cases. Endometrial uterine cancer can have a genetic basis if it's associated with other cancers as part of a family cancer syndrome called Lynch syndrome. But cervical cancer does not have a genetic basis. Cervical cancer is all about young age and sexual history risk factors. All right, what about hormonal cycles? This refers to how many menstrual cycles you've had in your lifetime. We call the total number your menstrual life. So this next cancer quiz question pertains to your menstrual life. Which of the following cancers is unrelated to your menstrual life? Can you believe that I keep recycling the list of answer options? I think doing so actually enhances your education, though, because it emphasizes some of these comparisons. So here's the answer in bold. It's cervical cancer. Now for screening. And here's your cancer quiz question on screening. The cancer or cancers for which there is or are no routine screening tests include and here's the answer in bold. It's endometrial uterine cancer and epithelial ovarian cancer. I've taught you that we have two screening tests for cervical cancer, the Pap smear and the HPV test. And they have served to make cervical cancer a very rare disease indeed. I've also taught you that we have 8 screening tests for breast cancer, which is why we diagnose it so early. But we do not have routine screening tests for either endometrial uterine or epithelial ovarian cancers. With those, we have to rely on symptoms or diagnostic tests. Do you see how all of this makes perfect sense in terms of why each of these cancers plays out as it does? Okie dokie, let's move on to symptoms. Here's your cancer quiz question on symptoms. The cancer or cancers that produces or produce the earliest symptoms include Now this one should be easy. If you watched my videos in order, you should have known the answer to this cancer quiz question without even seeing the possible answers. Here it is. It's endometrial uterine cancer. I taught you that endometrial uterine cancer and even endometrial uterine pre-cancer causes vaginal bleeding. Back in video number 326, I referred to it as sloughin' the stuffin'. It's so obvious that you can't miss it. But none of the other cancers produces any early symptoms at all. If you had to rely on symptoms in order to diagnose cervical cancer, breast cancer, and epithelial ovarian cancer, you would never diagnose them early. Cervical cancer produces symptoms decades after the start of the disease. Breast cancer doesn't produce symptoms until stage 3 or 4. And epithelial ovarian cancer doesn't produce symptoms until stage 3 or 4. And this is precisely why we need screening tests in order to diagnose them. So that brings us to our next factor of comparison, diagnosis. Here's your cancer quiz question on diagnosis. The cancer or cancers for which biopsy is necessary to confirm the diagnosis includes the key to this question is the word confirm. We're talking about confirming the presence of cancer or ruling out the presence of cancer. So here's the answer in bold. It's all 4 cancers. Every one of these cancers requires a biopsy for confirmation of actual cancer. For endometrial uterine cancer, it's an endometrial biopsy. For cervical cancer, it's cervical biopsies taken at the time of colposcopy. For breast cancer, it's a breast biopsy. And for epithelial ovarian cancer, it's biopsies of a lot of different organs at the time of major surgery. So biopsies are a big deal. What about pathology? That's our next comparative factor. The word pathology refers to the sequence of events that create a cancer. So it's the cellular changes that lead up to enough damage to constitute cancer. So it's quiz question time. Which of the following cancer or cancers results from a series of progressively abnormal cellular changes? This is another one that should be so easy that you don't even need to consider the answer options in order to answer it. Here it is. It's all 4 cancers. Recall that I taught you in the unit on cancer in general that the sequence of events is hyperplasia, followed by dysplasia, followed by neoplasia for all 4 cancers. So all 4 of these cancers involve the same pathological steps that result in cancer. The cell types differ, and the cell personalities differ. But it's only the particular details about each specific cancer that differ. Other than those details, the process is the same. You see, this is why I'm so dogmatic about the order of these videos, because I go from general to specific in my teaching. And that way you see that the general principles apply to everything. All right, how about grading and staging? This refers to the ranking of the cancers in terms of severity. Grading is the microscopic cellular ranking. Staging is the macroscopic organ ranking for how far the cancer has spread. I'm going to give you a cancer quiz question on just the staging. And here it is. For which of the following cancer or cancers does stage 1 refer to cancer confined to the organ of origin? am being so nice to you today. This is another super easy one. And here's the answer in bold. It's all for cancers. Basics, basics, basics. It all goes back to the basic principles I taught you in the unit on cancer in general. Stage 1, endometrial uterine cancer is confined to the uterus only. Stage 1 cervical cancer is confined to the cervix only. Stage 1 breast cancer is confined to the breast only. Stage 1 epithelial ovarian cancer is confined to the ovaries only. If this were the real Truth or Consequences game show on television, the viewers who want the entertainment of embarrassing situations as a consequence for failing to give the true answer would be truly, truly disappointed. And that's because you're probably answering all these questions correctly. And of course, stage dictates treatment. So that's our next factor of comparison. Here's your question on treatment. The cancer or cancers for which stage 1 treatment involves surgery, radiation therapy, and chemotherapy is or are and the answer is breast cancer. Ah, now you see one of the big differences between breast cancer and all the other cancers. I taught you that the full spectrum of surgery, radiation therapy, and chemotherapy is commonly employed to treat merely breast pre-cancer too. But this is not the case for any of the other cancers. Of course, that makes you wonder if such extensive treatment is warranted based on prognosis. So let's address prognosis as our next factor of comparison. You know that prognosis refers to the long-term outcome after having one of these cancers. Most commonly, it consists of the 5-year survival rates. So here's your cancer quiz question on prognosis. The cancer or cancers with the absolute best survival rates at all stages of disease is or are well, which answer is correct? The answer is not a close call. It's the winner by a long shot. And here it is in bold. It's breast cancer. In each cancer unit, I presented the 5-year survival rates for each stage of these 4 cancers. Here's a comparison chart for that. Notice the blue column for breast cancer, with all the highest survival rates at every stage of disease. I also presented the overall 5-year survival rates for each of these 4 cancers. Here's that comparison chart. Focus on the blue row this time. You can see that breast cancer survival surpasses all the others at every stage and overall. Obviously, nobody wants to deal with a diagnosis of any kind of cancer in the first place. So what about prevention? See if you can answer a quiz question on prevention. Surgical removal of the target organ is the most effective means of prevention for the following cancer or cancers. prevention spans a huge range of options from diet and lifestyle to surgery. But this question focuses specifically on surgical removal of the organ of origin of the cancer. So here's the answer. It's all 4 cancers. I gave you tutorials on all the means of prevention for each cancer individually, and you discovered that while there are diet and lifestyle measures for all of them, and vitamin, mineral, supplement measures for some of them, the only preventive measure that is guaranteed for any of them is surgery. And the degree of risk reduction with surgical removal is significant. Here's the chart I showed you in video number 443. The bottom line here is that the more organs you remove, the more you lower your cancer risks. Well, that's all fine and good, but surgery is surgery. Whether surgery is worth the risk reduction is an entirely personal matter. But one of the reasons these preventive surgical options exist in the first place is fear. So here's a cancer quiz question on fear. The highest level of fear overshadows which of the following cancer or cancers? The answer should be obvious. It's breast cancer. But the question then becomes, is it logical that the highest level of fear overshadows breast cancer? This is really a question about so-called common knowledge. What if I pose a cancer quiz question about common knowledge? So-called common knowledge is most distorted for which of the following cancer or cancers? I think you will definitely answer this one correctly. It's breast cancer. Common knowledge is not accurate knowledge. It's the power of fear that governs common knowledge with regard to breast cancer. And you've seen from these units on cancers that breast cancer does not warrant all the attention and fear associated with it. So, that's 15 quiz questions. And that's the end of our truth or consequences game. How did you do? You can see that comparing these 4 cancers really puts things into perspective. And I hope you had a little fun in so doing. Next week, I will give you a summary on density. It's a feature that you've seen with many of our previous units, cancer and non-cancer alike. So I'll present some comparisons with regard to density. Between now and then, be sure to visit menopauseTaylor.me for fun articles, easy access to the videos in order, and scheduling a consultation. Be sure to subscribe here and now before you leave today, and be sure to find me on social media, and I will see you in a week. Bye!